Jesus will not fail me. I shall not be put just like a tree that's planted by the water. Anchored in your. All right, all right, all right. Welcome to the Waycast. We are in Second Corinthians chapter 12 tonight. And the theme is the revelation of Paul's apostleship, the introduction. Unfortunately, Paul's still trying to convince him he's an apostle. We hear a great deal in our day about space travel. This has been a big subject through the decades of the 60s and 70s. Men have been to the moon. Actually, that isn't really very far when you consider space travel. It is a long distance to the moon, and yet it is small compared to the distance to Mars and other planets. Then, when one measures the distance to our neighboring constellation of Andromeda, that is way out there in space. We may say that man hasn't been very far yet. The very interesting thing is that the Bible has the record of three men who journeyed into outer space and then returned. One whom are in the old none of whom are in the Old Testament. I know someone will say, "What about Enoch and Elijah?" I do not think they were caught up to heaven. The Lord Jesus said, "And no man hath ascended up to heaven, but he that came down from heaven, even the Son of Man which is in heaven." John chapter 3 and verse 13. Someone will say, I thought Elijah was caught up to heaven. Yes, but after all, there are three heavens. There is the first heaven where there are the birds of heaven. There is a second heaven where there is the stars of heaven. And there is a third heaven, which is the abode of God. Elijah had been caught up into the airspace. Up to the time of the Lord Jesus made that statement, possibly there had been no one else who had been in outer space. He said that the Son of Man came down from heaven. Then we know of two others who had been to heaven and returned. The Apostle John on the Isle of Patmos was caught up into heaven. He writes about what he saw and heard in the book of Revelations. He was in the third heaven where the throne of God is. After these I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was as it were a trumpet talking with me, which said, "Cometh hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter." And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. That's Revelations chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. Paul was the other man who was taken up into heaven. The record is in the chapter before us. Therefore, there were three men who have been able to report from heaven. The Lord Jesus, who is God manifest in the flesh, said more about heaven than anyone else did. And yet, he really said very little about it. John doesn't have too much to say about it. Paul doesn't have anything to say about it. Paul tells us something here that we would not have mentioned at all if he had not been forced to defend his apostleship. He tells about his trip into outer space.